You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and in this episode, we will dive into the works of one of the biggest comedic icons in history, Buster Keaton. Stoneface himself, known for his small stature, sad eyes, and often straight-out insane stunts that could easily have killed him. Jackie Chan even cited him as a hero and inspiration, and in one of his stunts, he broke his neck and continued the take. But Keaton was not just some daredevil comedian who did his own stunts. He was also his own director until he signed a deal with MGM, lost practically all creative control, and some years later, his leading actor career. But in this episode, we'll mainly look at the glory years, when he was in control. We'll trace his on-screen career from his early days as Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle's sidekick, where he co-directed one of their worst-rated films, The Rough House. Look at his early solo shorts, especially 1 Week and The High Sign. See how he tackled the transition to features with 3 H's, and go over his best regarded solo director efforts, Sherlock Jr, and of course, The General, the last feature he was actually credited as directing. And every film he directed afterwards, at least in feature scale, was sadly uncredited. Many other films will definitely be brought up along the way. It's hard not to, with the number of shorts and feature Keaton starred in and directed, but we had to pick some focus points. And we'll also try to stick to them, as this episode is likely going to be longer than any Keaton feature just by default. So let's get the ball rolling here and introduce my two absolutely excellent co-hosts, Marcel and Saul. And before we dive into the films themselves, I just love to hear from you. What is it to you that makes Buster Keaton stand out and feel special?
This is naturally a very layered kind of question, but I'll try to briefly sketch out some of the aspects of his work that personally really stand out for me. First of all, for me, Keaton has this striking honesty going on about him, and his entire demeanor and approach to filmmaking. There's the great honesty of his physical presence and the authenticity of all his stunts. Of course, cheap tricks, they will always belong to the realm of vaudeville or the burlesque or these kind of silent comedy tradition. And there's a lot going on behind the cameras that we don't know. But one kind of effect that really stands out and comes out of Keaton's work is that you can always feel it. It's real. It's on the screen there. He has really performed these feats. You can very palpably perceive the dangers, the successes of his stunts. If you really delve into his work and you see all of his feature films and short films, you get a real sense of this Keaton universe. On one side, there are all these natural forces at work, a vast landscape through which this tiny hero moves in, grapples with, and gets swept away by it. All the physical elements for Keaton is primarily water and wind that get aggravated and to the level of cyclones and floods, which sweep away cities, which attack and the character from all directions, and through which he has to navigate and move around. And on the other side, there's the realm of machines, loads of machines, cars, trains, your pulleys and switches and so forth. Your cogs, your ropes, your traps, your sailboats and whatnot. And his character himself constructs machines. He becomes enveloped by them, but sometimes this construction reaches absurdist levels. And of course, just having a toolbox on the floor or a rope that he doesn't notice, that there's great potential for gags. Two more aspects that I want to mention. One of them is that he, more so than other directors of his age, I believe, at least especially in the mainstream American setting, is that he has an affinity with emphasizing his own artifice. He's one of the first comedians to really introduce breakings of the fourth wall. He's drawing attention to the filmmaking process. He's created dream montages and his kind of proto-Dadaist, proto-surrealist moments. Often his characters are movie projectionists or journalists that film movies and so forth. And there's this drawing attention to itself, and yeah, the breaking of the fourth wall is very prominent. And finally, of course, there's the kind of romantic elements and subplots, the courtings, the figure of the dreamer, and whatnot. But maybe I'll let Al talk about that. And of course, everything else that he enjoys about Keaton.
That's a really interesting observation, actually. I hadn't actually thought about the fact that it's in so many of his films, especially his features, like technology and machines play such a huge part of them. What about you, Sol? What do you think stands out the most about Buster Keaton?
Like you, Chris, I do also like what Marcel said about machines, because that does make sense now that he's mentioned it, but it's not something that I've actively thought about before. But everything from 1 week up to the general, you do sort of get that with different inventions and different things going on. I also like what Marcel said about the authenticity of the stunts there. The stunts is probably one of the big things that stands out about Buster Keaton. You said it in your intro, Chris, how Daredevil-like the stunts are. That really stands out because a lot of them just seem so dangerous, and yet he did them all. The other thing about Keaton, which has always stood out to me, is just the pale face character that he plays with his facial reactions, and it's sort of this stone face, unemotional, but he is still like a character, he's still a human being, but just the way that he doesn't like react to everything and things happen around him. It's a very distinct performance. And it is kind of interesting that Keaton and Chaplin with The Tramp have those sort of two distinct personalities. It's sort of like in each of the films, or at least in most of the films, Keaton's playing that same sort of character, and just that sort of acting style can be really funny, especially when you get somebody like Joe Roberts or Wallace Beery in support, and they're being like really over the top and really reacting to things, where Keaton's just doing his own usual stone face reaction. So that for me really stands out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. I think one of those things that are really great with Keaton is that it's almost entirely reactive. I mean, there's sometimes he'll be taking a mission upon himself, but usually he's just someone who's just extremely accident prone. He gets sucked into a situation and he just has to react. And those reactions are incredibly physical. I mean, I think that his physicality is one of the most interesting things about Keaton. I think I've heard it said that he viewed every single fall as a new opportunity to find something creative to do. He was just trying to fall in different ways, find different ways to very, very similar things. And sometimes he just scales something up, like the amount of times he gets hit by windows, for instance, and the last one in Steamboat Bill being so deadly that, like, just if he had stood 2 inches to the left or right, he'd be gone on the spot. I think he really perfected his craft of falling without obviously getting hurt. And it's remarkable to me, like that stunt in Sherlock Jr., he breaks his neck. Like, I didn't even realize it was that dangerous. Like, you see the water just splash over him, and you think, oh, that's just, you don't realize how dangerous that actually was. And similarly with Our Hospitality, where I genuinely didn't believe this until I had to look further into it, but many of those scenes in the river, those were accidental. The rope he was using broke, and because he had told his cameraman to just follow him and move the camera and keep filming no matter what happened, they just kept filming. And you don't even realize that it wasn't planned that way. There's so often just this sense that things are happening in the moment that most other silent comedians did not have. In fact, I think Keaton is on record as saying that about 40 to 50% of everything that happened was improvised on the spot as well. And some of the most hilarious gags came from stunts failing. So just this creativity is just one of those things that really, really stand out. And I also just completely agree with you, Saul, when you say that like just the way he reacts, it's not over the top, and it's not with smiles, laughs, and giggles and mischievousness like Chaplin. It's like this either no reaction at all, or with just very quaint surprise or sadness, and he just manages to get so much out of this. It's almost like that Lev Show experiments where, he can pretty much have the same face, but you read things into it. And many times you can really feel his emotion as well, which is just absolutely remarkable. So, yeah, excellent performer, just incredible stuntman, and just rewatching many of his shorts, and also just after rewatching those shorts, seeing highlights of his stunts. Many of them you don't even catch in the moment how dangerous some of them were, or just the fact they were stunts. Just became more and more impressed by his physicality and what he was able to do. And with what we appreciate with Keaton out of the way, it would just be, I think it makes sense to just dive into his actual short films. And we can probably start with just his earliest short with Fatty Arbuckle, where he was kind of like a sidekick, sometimes in the films, maybe 5 out of 20 minutes. I'm not a huge fan of the Archbuckle films myself, but I know you at least like the Archbuckle shorts more than me. So what's your opinion of them?
Oh, look, the Fatty Arbuckle shorts, they do vary a bit in how funny they are. The biggest issue watching it as a Keaton fan is they aren't really Keaton showcases. He's always the supporting player. He's actually doing, generally, there's a lot of over-the-top reacting to there, like something will happen, you just see like Keaton like scour his face, which is not what we're used to seeing from him. But the films themselves, some of them are actually pretty good. There's a Coney Island one, which is quite funny, which has got lots of different set pieces in there. But I'd say with all the Arbuckle ones, they do pretty much depend on Arbuckle to generate laughs rather than Keaton themselves. So look, they're not uninteresting. They vary a bit in effectiveness. Arbuckle's comedy range isn't as great as Keaton's was in his prime, so, they're a bit up and down, but in general, watching it as Keaton's short completist, I think I've seen all of his available short comedies, including the Arbuckle ones. They're passable, they're interesting, but I'm more predisposed to liking silent comedies than other people are.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you about the range of Arbuckle. I mean, his whole thing is just like being a perpetual child, not even a child, a baby. Like in the Coney Island one, where his introduction is essentially like he's sitting next to his wife and he's acting like a toddler. Like that's the whole joke. He has the mental capacity of a toddler. Then you have Keaton Stoneface next to him. And I think there's some good dynamics there. Like in Bellboy, there's some stunts and acts that actually feel a bit more Keaton-esque. And as their partnership developed, Keaton gets more of a co-starring role, which is great to see. And I feel like he kind of rescues or elevates Arbuckle a little bit. But yeah, no, I think Arbuckle doesn't have the presence. He's obviously the lead in all of these films. Keaton is the sidekick, and I think Keaton is often either the best thing about them, or he just disappears in them. We barely notice him. So I'm not a fan of them, even though there are some standout moments along the way. What about you, Marcel?
Something to point out as well is that Keaton, he was born into a vaudeville family and started performing with his parents when he was just a few months old, or maybe I'm exaggerating now. But I did read, for example, on Wikipedia, he earned the nickname Buster when he was 18. So Keaton is an individual that has, lived with artifice and creating cheap tricks for the public since a super, super young age. And there's pictures of him in his vaudeville costumes when he was just a few months old, a few years old, and so forth. But with the Fatty Arbuckle movies, I suppose there's like a 3-4 year period of collaboration between the two of them, and it's the first time that he's creating a short film in front of a camera and in this kind of setting, not with a live audience nearby or anything like that, but really creating like a self-contained motion picture, right? And obviously, taking Keaton's overall filmography and career, this Fatty period is just a footnote to it, right? Like none of these short films will really compare to any of Keaton's solo ventures, but I suppose they can be very much appreciated for Fatty taking him under his wing and being able to show him and introduce him to this Hollywood production machine and everything that goes involved, that comes with standing behind the camera, operating these invisible lines around and creating these gags for the line. And there's obviously very good moments in some of them. I've seen the Butcher Boy and the Rough House, so his first credited performance and his first credit for co-direction. And there's very good moments in both of them, but they don't have the same kind of punch and striking effect as Keaton's solo ventures. And as Saul said, they are more so Fatty's short films and his style of comedy and his kind of gag. So the writing is very clear on that front, but we can obviously appreciate them as being very formative for Keaton's career.
Yeah, no, I completely agree there. And I mean, a lot of the gags that Keaton pulls in these films are very similar to the gags he's going to pull later as well. So you can feel his screen persona developing there. And yes, you were absolutely right about his organs. I think I read that he was 4 years old when he got his first paycheck, like in 1899. And I've seen those pictures of him too, like in a beard, all bald. And apparently, I'm not sure if it was from the beginning, but after a while, they sew like a hook into his clothes because the whole act, or at least a part of the act, was his father, Joe Keaton, who's in a lot of his films as well, just throwing Buster around the scene, even with getting the police, the real world police involved because they thought it was child abuse. You know, it might have been, at least by today's standards, but he learned how to fall from a very, 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 very young age. And that's clearly a talent that made him the star he was. And I forgot to mention The Rough House, which was the first film that Keaton co-directed. And there's just such a good example of what's different between the Arbuckle shorts and Keaton's own shorts, because Arbuckle shorts are essentially completely OCD. I mean, Keaton has some of that in his early shorts as well, but let's take the first joke in that Arbuckle short, The Rough House. It starts with him dropping, I think it's a cigarette, onto his bed, and things are starting to catch fire. And while this is being set up, we need to go into the kitchen, where you need to set up new jokes with the chef and someone else competing over a girl, and you have some other mini jokes in the way, and then Arbuckle wakes up to the fire and his nonplussed walks in, and you have to have lots of these mini jokes inside the joke of Arbuckle not being very concerned about the fire. And that's not necessary. The fire joke on its own is actually pretty funny, but he just keeps diluting it with all of these extra jokes. And as Keaton developed, especially after his first few shorts, he learned that, he didn't, like, one joke could play at the time. He can return to a joke sometimes, but he can pause it out. He doesn't need a joke every single second. Like, it's not Airplane. Like, you can take a little break and build momentum before the last starts. And by the time you get to the general, that's really honed down. So I think it was really great because I hadn't seen any Arbuckle shorts before this episode. I had never been that interested. So seeing a few of them back to back in preparation just really made me appreciate the growth that Keaton had in the span of just about 10 years. I mean, the first Arbuckle short are from 1917. The general is from 1926. So yeah, that's exactly 10 years of his creative journey. But moving on from these collaborative efforts where Keaton really just was a side player. In 1920, he set up his own studio. He started making films where he was the lead, and one of the most iconic ones of those was 1 Week, which of course features that falling wall gag. Apparently that was used in the Arbuckle short I haven't seen as well, but it has falling walls, going through windows, and so much more. How do you guys think that 1 Week stacks up in Keaton's filmography, and is it one of his best shorts?
So I would say that yes, 1 Week is one of Keaton's best shorts. Not only that, I'd say it's his very best short, and it's actually his very best film overall. Because my biggest gripe with Keaton is that a lot of his films are set pieces, his feature-length films are just various set pieces strung together. And for me, Buster Keaton has always worked better in short film mode rather than feature-length mode. And because 1 Week is only between 20 and 25 minutes long, depending on the frame rate that you're watching it at, it never quite ties or exhausts itself. It's got a very distinct story in there about a couple moving into their new home or trying to build their own home and the issues that they have with it. There's a little bit of sabotage in there, a little bit of a villain in there, but there's also some other problems that go wrong along the way. Those are really great, airtight story that works because it's very short and compact and it's not drawn out to feature length. Quite aside from that, it's got some amazing stunt work. The falling of the wall and Keaton staying there, he sort of falls through the window. That's amazing. But even beyond that, there are parts where Keaton's running out of doors that are 2 stories up because the house has been built incorrectly. He doesn't realize it's actually a door there going to outside, and the way that he lands and falls. There's a lot of physicality in that, and none of it seems random or pointless. It's all sort of related to that idea of trying to build that perfect home and the difficulties with creating your very first home there. And there's some insane parts in there with the house moving and spinning around when it gets blown around in the wind. And he has a housewarming part, and one of the guests comments that he really loves the merry-go-round of it. And it's just really funny, and it's a really impactful story, and it doesn't outstay its welcome. And unfortunately, I can't really say that about Keaton's feature-length films, and I guess we'll get onto that later because it's a bit of a controversial opinion. But beyond 1 week, The High Sign, you've even got stuff like Convicts 13, The Goat, The Haunted House. There are so many Keaton features that are just excellent films on their own. That for me, he's always been somebody who excels more in the short film format rather than the feature-length format. And I'm sorry that wasn't all about one.
Wow. Yeah, no, we will get into that more when we get to the features, I guess. But wow, I mean, Convict 13 is actually one of my least favorite Keaton shorts, and I think it has one of those issues where it's like many of those feel closer to the Arbuckle shorts in just how OCD they are, how they can't really stick to one story. I mean, Convict 13 goes from golfing to prison. Like, yeah, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it like for a very long time, I was just like looking at it like, why are characters reacting like this? Like, all of this could stop if one of them just said, "Hi, I am who I am."
Yeah, well, that's how I sort of feel about Keaton in general. Like, all of Keaton's films are sort of like collections of skits put together, and therefore it works in the short film format rather than in the longer format. I mean, probably one of the best ones also would be The Playhouse, where Keaton's playing lots of different multiple roles, and it's kind of funny for 20 minutes, but if that went on for 90 minutes, it would exhaust itself. And even something like The Electric House, which is another one about building a home. It's similar, I guess, in a way. Not really building a home, he's fixing a home, making it electric or electrifying it. Sort of similar to One House, similar to 1 Week in a way. That for me works really well because it's compacted and it's really short. All the sort of skits sort of work, whereas if you draw it out to feature length, that's when it gets diluted. But 1 Week for me is the best, I guess, because it's got that skit-like element to it. You've got this villain there who's trying to sabotage the house, but then the villain disappears completely. So it is a little bit skit-like, but it's still got a very solid story, which for me is why it's his best short, which also maybe makes it his best overall film. But I'll stop droning on and I will let somebody else talk now.
No, that's perfectly fair. So we'll definitely get into that. I mean, I think actually his films, his feature films, as he progresses at least, manage to stay on track and go less off the rails. I mean, if you look like something like Hard Luck, for instance, and Daydream, and a lot of these shorts, like they are, like you said, collections of skits, like 2-3 minutes for one skit, 2-3 for another, and they're barely connected because you move from situation to situation in his life. But then again, you have something like Cops, where it's just like a chase. Like, there's a build up, but then you just get a long chase. But to comment on 1 Week, I would have loved to say that 1 Week is one of Keaton's best shorts. It didn't quite go that way for me. If it had been a little bit shorter, maybe, because I just feel like the first 3, 4, 5 minutes where it's about him getting married and they go out, that's a little bit bewildering for me, because that early gag where they're in the car with and the driver is his wife's ex, and he's trying to sabotage things, and the wife suddenly just get out and she walks into another car. I didn't get that joke, because Like, why did she just get out and get into another joke, like get into another car? Who runs that car? Why did she think that was a good idea? And then Keaton starts chasing her. That joke, like, there's some really amazing stunt work where Keaton is stretched between two cars, but like that joke just kind of didn't fit with the rest and felt odd. Then we get to the actual house stuff, and that's amazing. I think that the whole concept of, hey, we're gonna assemble a house and it's not gonna work. He literally just gets a box of planks and he's there putting together it, following the instructions, getting the instructions wrong. It's a mess, and then it's just all of the hidings based on that, and so many things that you wouldn't expect the house to do. Doors go where they shouldn't be. Walls just can spin around and have all of these effects. I mean, this is something that a lot of silent comedies at the time did. I mean, Chaplin did some similar things too, with like all of these magical houses, and Keaton did several other things with houses with doors where it shouldn't be, etc. too, including the high sign, which we'll talk about soon. But here the concept was just so pure, it's so prop based, and it's absolutely hilarious. So those gags really hit home, and yeah, it's a really special type of comedy, despite having a lot of the similar gimmicks to a lot of other things going on at the same time.
But one thing we can surely all agree on is that Keaton's short films trump Chaplin's by a country mile, right? Like Keaton's short films are way more accomplished, right? Like this goes without saying. Whereas maybe Chaplin is more accomplished precisely in this feature length kind of setup, but as far as the short film craft goes, Keaton just completely amazing. But that's a different discussion, of course. Battle of the two main silent comedy geniuses. Although, funny enough, I saw 1 week. I believe I saw it for the first time in the cinema with my parents with a live orchestra when I was like very young. And that screening actually preceded a Charlie Chaplin screening, City Lights. And going out of the cinema, of course, like the 1 week has struck a chord. It goes without saying. It was a very unique, very special moment on short film. There's all of these, even though it's over 100 years old, all of its gags, all of its shorts still have this universal quality to them. There's two moments that I want to emphasize. Of course, there's the wall falling and Keaton being positioned just in the right exact spot where there's a gap in the wall for him to actually survive the impact. And that's something that he will call back later throughout this work, which is like just paying a homage and indeed drawing attention to its own artifice, again, from my point of view. And then there's this one moment that you guys haven't mentioned, it is this fourth wall breaking moment, right? It's the scene where his wife, the bride, she's in the bathtub, scrubbing her hands with the soap. And Keaton, at the time, the character of the groom, is somewhere on the roof because eventually he'll fall into the bathtub. But there's this one moment where the bride, she drops the soap on the floor, and then she has to reach for it. But the camera would film her nude breast in that case. So she looks directly at the camera, and there's just this hand that covers the camera, which is surely Keaton's hand as well, even though his character is simultaneously on the roof. And this breaking the fourth wall moment is super unique as far as the history of cinema is concerned.
Yep, I think he gives him the thumbs up as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and in a broader meta cinematic, meta fictional context, you could interpret this 1 week. Oh, and 1 week, by the way, it's there's always this kind of calendar being ripped off. There's this very sequential moment, day-to-day structure put in place. But you could see it broader as his own, because it is his first short film, and it is directed by his longtime collaborator, Eddie Klein, of course. But you could see this as his first solo venture out into the world. And, well, what is the topic? It's creating a house that gets sabotaged. And it is maybe the start of his own creative journey.
I'll just chime in there and say that I do agree that Keaton's shorts are much better than Chaplin's shorts. For me, that's sort of the big difference between them. Like Chaplin's best feature films, I think, are much better than Keaton's best feature films. But in terms of the short film format, I would say Keaton's shorts work best. A lot of it, I guess, is to do with the fact that Keaton's shorts are more skit-based, and they're all about the stunts and all these individual little things, whereas Chaplin's films are a lot more character-driven. And because they're more character-driven stories, something like City Lights or Modern Times works really well at feature length. For me, better than Keaton's features do. But for me, it's the thing. For feature-length films, prefer Chaplin. For shorts, prefer Keaton. But for me, if I'm being totally honest, Harold Lloyd is better than them both.
Oh wow, yeah. No, we need to do a Keaton versus Chaplin versus Lloyd episode. Like this cements it. It has to be done. Maybe we can even try to to get that done soon. We just love to do that one. But I will agree that Keaton shorts are on the whole much better than Chaplin shorts. I mean, Chaplin has a few that are great. Like I love 1 a.m., which is very similar to Buster Keaton in some ways. I mean, it's before Keaton shorts, but it's similar. Like lots of falling, lots of house gags, and I think A Dog's Life is also absolutely fantastic. But like in general, Keaton shorts are just much better, more consistent in quality as well. No doubt about it. On features, I actually think that they're more or less on par in the silent era. I might even prefer Keaton on features, but that's something we'll have to debate at the later time, because this is not the time or place. Let's just move on to the high sign instead, which for me is one of Keaton's best shorts. I also love the Scarecrow and several others. I just had to shout out the Scarecrow since we need to cut it short and I won't be able to talk about it. But like even just from the very beginning, like this title card that comes up, like our hero came from, I think it came from somewhere and ended up nowhere, or came from nowhere and ended up somewhere. You just see him falling off a train and being thrown off a train. That's just absolutely hilarious on its own. And then you just have Keaton in his usual confused disposition, just wandering around, trying to find a job and figure out the craft and getting sucked into all of these hijinks, including with a large criminal underbelly. And there's so many hilarious gags, including one of the most iconic house gags, where it's shot through the walls. You see 4 rooms, and Keaton is just running, climbing through these rooms, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top floor, being chased. Utterly hilarious. There's also insane shooting gags. There's lots of general craziness, and I think that at that point Keaton had really just, in a way, like this is still super fast paced in a lot of ways, more so than his features. But at this point, his persona had really solidified itself, and I think that this is definitely on par with pretty much everything that Keaton made. Just top notch. What did you guys think of it?
I'm a big fan of the high sign also. For me, it's not quite as high up there as 1 Week, just in terms of the overall story. But yeah, the gags in there are great. The 4-room thing, or where the screen split into like basically 4, and you're seeing 2 levels of the building. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. The part where he's trying to like rig a gun to be able to go off because he's in a shooting gallery and he's trying to get like the dog to move to chase the cat. Just so many great parts there, plus the whole like mistaken identity thing with what the high sign is. Yeah, so for me, it's one of his best shorts, and for me, it's further proof that Keaton's shorts were better than his features.
Isn't there a moment when there's like a kind of parody version of the tramp that goes in and appears in this shooting range?
Yes, there was this character that comes in there that definitely reminded of Chaplin.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of gentlemen look that way, but this one is not incidental. Very characteristic penguin walk. So Keaton is, of course, acknowledging his own influences, Chaplin included, but of course he moves in his own direction. And yes, the gag at the very end with the 4 rooms and characters jostling around from one to the other, chasing each other, is quite iconic, and it shows Keaton's affinity and predilection to play around with geometric space and see, and there's often very vividly framed shots of pure geometric space in all that, in some sense. So rectangles, how do we exploit rectangles? Triangles, okay, how do we do this? A gap in the middle, so that's something we have to jump over, etc., etc. And it's also emphasizes this kind of point. Like I don't know if I can feel it, but there's a saying from one video YouTube essay. Keaton is all about what you see is what you get, and it just means that the viewer, the spectator, sees the image. It's he that sees the rectangular frame, and that's all the information you can gather from it. The characters within the shot are similarly oblivious to what's happening, and there's this kind of gag exploitable contradictions and weirdness and magic tricks that could go on as a result of that.
Yeah, I love what you say about geometric spaces. I mean, this is one of those things that goes through a lot of Keaton's films, where he just plays with the space in the frame. It's absolutely glorious to see. I mean, this is essentially 1 week as well. Similar gag, similar ways that things react the way you don't expect them to, and there's this never-ending chases. I mean, that's something we see in The Scarecrow as well, which is possibly my favorite Keaton short, where the dog chases him on top of the roof, and he removes a plank, and so the dog can't jump over, and he just keep running and jumping over that, and the dog is going to run from the other side, just jump over it again, until finally sits down thinking he's safe, and the dog carefully takes his time, and then jumps over and manages it after all. So I think these kind of chases, these kinds of plays with form, what we're seeing on the frame, etc., and just walls moving and changing in insane ways, hidden compartments, all of these things, they're some of the best things from Keaton's shorts, mainly his shorts. And they are absolutely great to watch. But at one point, very briefly into his solo career, Keaton decided to take the plunge into feature films. His first feature films came out in 1923. Like his first shorts were in 1920, and it was carried on for a few years, and then bang into the shorts. And bang into the features. And his very, very first feature was 3 H's, which makes sense when you're trying to make that leap, because essentially you have 3 shorts or 3 stories kind of merged together, and Keaton and Wolfsberry and some other actors as well playing the same characters in 3 different ages: Stone Age, Roman Age, and present day 1920s. And it kind of goes like, okay, here's like the wooing scene, like the first spark of romance, and here's the 2 suitors fighting over the girl. It kind of goes step by step, but it shows how those steps by steps would go in the Stone Age, in the Roman era, and in present time. And there's some change ups too. It's not like it's exactly the same thing happening, but it's one after the other at the same point in the story. For my money, I think that 3 H's is one of Keaton's lesser features. I think that the modern era is pretty close to great. It's at least the best of the 3. The Roman era is pretty good. The Stone Age one, it feels a bit off. I mean, he gets Wallace Beery to be his co-star here, and Beery is a great actor, but in the Stone Age era, he literally just covers him up with a huge fake beard, a huge fake wig, and you can only see his eyes. Like, that could have been any extra. It kills so much, and the costumes are odd, but not so odd or off that they're comedic in themselves. There's some great gags there too. Like, there's fun gags throughout, but at least to me, this was not one of his best works. What did you guys think about the 3 H's and his transition into features?
Yeah, I think 3 Ages was a pretty poor transition to features. I mean, I know he did Our Hospitality a little bit later in the year, which is a great film, as I know you agree with that, Chris. But yeah, 3 Ages, considering that, Chaplin's first short was The Kid, and that came out 2 years earlier, and Harold Lloyd did Dr. Jack the year before this, and that Harold Lloyd did Safety Last the same year as 3 Ages. 3 Ages is a shockingly poor film. I mean, part of it's just because of the way that it was made. Keaton didn't believe that he would be able to market it as a feature-length film, so he filmed these 3 different storylines because the whole idea was that he would be able to re-edit them and release them as short films if the feature film wasn't a success. But it was a success, which kind of mystifies me. Although I guess if people really like Keaton in the shorts and really like to see more of him on screen, maybe. But I mean, there was one part where I laughed out loud, which is the part where he gets punched in the face at the restaurant, and the gag that leads up to it. I thought that was hilarious. There's some phone booth stuff towards the end, which was kind of amusing also. But for most of it, the comedy was sort of killed for me just by the way it was randomly put together. I mean, it's not quite random as such, but just the chopping and change between the 3 different storylines just meant I couldn't get invested in anything in there. And his love interest, Margaret Lee, is a terrible actress. She has no screen presence at all in there. And I guess the film has this idea that's trying to convey across that love has not really changed over times, and I don't think anything in the film really went to support that, because it wasn't really about that. It's more about other things. And yeah, for me, the whole film was just a complete and utter mess. There's some amusing parts there. There's a chariot ride with dogs. There's amusing bits and pieces, but yeah, for me, it's a complete mess all over the place. And considering that Safety Last came out in the same year, considering the Kid came out 2 years before that, it's just, just a terrible start for Keaton by comparison. And it's amazing he managed to bounce back with Hospitality only a few months later.
Perhaps part of the reason why it was successful and its success, it's a mystifying success for you, Saul. Well, doesn't its function or is it like structured as a parody of Intolerance, the Griffith film?
I was thinking that actually. I'm not sure if it's a parody, but when I was watching it, I was thinking, this is a bit like Intolerance. So you might be spot on.
Yeah, maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Yeah, you're actually right with that, Marcel, because I remember reading that online and going, oh, well, I've never actually seen Intolerance, so maybe that's why I didn't quite...
Okay, you have some viewings to do.
Oh, well, I don't know. I just like early Griffiths or whatever, Birth of the Nation. I haven't seen Birth of the Nation either. I mean, I know it's like cinematically remarkable, but just, the content of that or whatever, I've just got no interest in it. So, like, Griffith is a bit of like a cinematic black hole for me. There's a bit of stuff there that I haven't seen that I should have maybe.
Or you can do an episode of Griffith at some point. I'm not a huge fan, but Intolerance is one of his best. My issue with Griffith has always been that I find his storytelling very, very dumb. And Intolerance has some things in there, but it's clear that they haven't even looked up the definition of intolerance. Like soldiers praying to their god before going to battle is marked as intolerance, for instance. Or slaves not being willing to die for their king is implied to be intolerance. It's just lots of really bizarre stuff. It's like everything we don't like is intolerance, but it looks spectacular. Anyways, back to the topic of
Yeah, I doubt you'll ever have so many jokes, or I doubt Griffith put any anachronistic elements in the film. Like Free Ages, like I actually saw it for the first time this week. It has these nice anachronistic elements, like in the Roman Empire time. There's Keaton looks at his wristwatch, right? I mean, it's a great joke, and then he just goes and there's like a no parking sign. I mean, a no parking sign could be conceivable in the Roman times, but it is deliberately an early 20th century American film for early 20th century Americans. Like it reminded me of the Flintstones in some moments, right? Even though that, created 30 years in the future.
I mean,
No, sorry, go ahead.
I'll give a quick shout out to Max Linder as well. It was one of the big inspirations for both Keaton and Chaplin, and like his parody of the Three Musketeers, which is called the Three Musketeers, which I think was 1921, where you have the Musketeers in bed and the phone rings and they answer it. For instance, like
Nice. Yeah, I agree. Max Linder is also he's up there as one of the best silent comedians. But I agree with you wholeheartedly, Chris, that the modern era is the best one. It's the funniest one, and it just emphasizes that Keaton works best in this milieu, in this temporal zone. Because I mean, for the two funniest and most noteworthy moments, I think from Three Ages are one when he's like driving his car, he's on his way to court this beautiful daughter, and then there's another guy in like a way slicker, more advanced car that just passes him by, and then Keaton's all of a sudden just disintegrates on itself and he just lands with his butt on the street, we're holding his steering wheel. There's that one, and then there's an important one in his maybe, I don't know, in its kind of fame or mystique of Keaton and him, or the development of his stunts and all that, is that there is a famous moment when he has to jump from one building to another, and the entire plot was structured, the narrative was, and sequence of jokes were structured so that he makes the jump. However, he failed the jump, had to lie in bed for 3 days, and then came back and reworked the joke and reworked the entire sequence to function with him falling down. And it's actually one of the most hilarious and very fast-paced sequences. So he basically falls down, goes through 3 layers of cloth. He goes on a plank. The plank propels him into a room. He slides through the room, falls down a fireman's hall, falls down on the lowest level, and then, out of his confusion, just moves and seats himself on the fire truck that brings him right back from the place he escaped, that is the police station. So there's this, great circularity at work again. And any moments when there's chases in Keaton films are just absolutely amazing. From his short films, like in Seven Chances, at some point in the last year, he's chased by loads of different women, and yeah, whether it's gangsters or brides that are unhappy or anything, yeah, this chase element is very prominent. But yeah, back to Three Ages. Another funny anachronistic element, I suppose, is in the Roman Empire time when he has to battle it out with the other courtier. He has these horses, these big Roman caravan, and Keaton, of course, has the little pups, these dogs that carry his carriage.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are some fun gags throughout. I mean, there's this one gag where Keaton is caught cheating in the Stone Age era and he's tied to an elephant and it leaves. And then much later in the film, the segment starts with like his vacation is over and the elephant comes back and he's still tied to it like a long time after. Yeah, no, that stunt you described is probably the biggest laugh in the film, Marcel. I love that stunt. It belongs to a better film, to be honest, but just how he could react to that. Like one failed stunt and then reorganizes all of it and it comes out as one of the biggest laughs. I mean, it just shows that he can really just think on the spot and change everything around. And if it wasn't for that stunt, like who knows how? Like I think it would have affected the quality of Three Ages overall because it's just so hilarious. But yeah, I think we all agree that Three Ages was not Keaton's greatest hour. I'm so happy that everyone seems to agree that Our Hospitality is at least a lot better because that is my favorite Keaton. But maybe we can save Our Hospitality or Steamboat Bill for a Keaton versus Lloyd versus Chaplin versus maybe even Linder episode at some point. And just skip on to Sherlock Jr., which is barely a feature. It's around 45 minutes long, but it just packs so much in. And it's this kind of insane hybrid of Keaton's developing feature style, where he would be more and more tied to one consistent story and space himself, and Keaton's shorts, where things would be far more hyperactive and skip from topic to topic to topic. Because here you have, as Marcel mentioned earlier, this essentially he works at the cinema, he's a camera operator, but he's also just the guy who has to clean everything and do everything there. Like he's essentially just the owner's servant, but he dreams about being a great detective. Both figuratively and literally. He gets ensnarled in a mystery where another suitor, a shady suitor of his love, frames him for stealing her father's watch. And then he dreams himself into a movie he's watching where a similar scenario takes place. So you essentially have two characters, Dream Keaton and Real Keaton. You have Keaton who wants to be a detective, and then you have the dream character of Sherlock Jr., where all of the people from real life replaces the actors in the screen because they're watching a movie with actors. But step by step, these actors are replaced by their real world equivalents. And this film just goes into so many crazy directions. This is also the film where Keaton broke his neck performing a stunt. And again, it's just 45 minutes long. There's so much craziness. And it's probably the Keaton film I've also seen the most times. I think I've seen it 4 times at this point, and it's gone up every single time in my esteem, from not being too impressed the first time to loving it and seeing it as one of his best this last time. So I'd love to hear what you guys think about Sherlock Jr.
Well, for me, Sherlock Jr. is Keaton's best feature-length film. As I said before, I prefer him in short film mode, and a sort of part of it for me is probably because it's only around 45 minutes long. It doesn't quite overstay its welcome as much as some of his other feature-length films do. There are certain bits and pieces of the film which do drag for me, which is why I don't consider it to be as great as One Week in the High Sign, although it's hard to rate feature-length films against shorts. But there's one part where he's a detective and he's randomly stopping his investigations to play a game of pool. I don't know the game of pool has been rigged or whatever, but I'm like, why is he stopping his detective work to do that? He's also got a really poor love interest in the film. Like, it's just like, she's easily won over by a box of chocolates, and like that's all that she is. And for me, as a narrative, it is a little bit lacking because it tries to be that like narrative put out to feature length film, but because it's only around 45 minutes, it is still very nice and brisk at 45 minutes, and you get some amazing parts in there. Like quite aside from all the stunts, one of my favorite scenes in there is when he's shadowing Ward Crane, who's just a suspect, and he's walking in synchrony with him and like stopping and doing everything else as he's walking. For me, it's just a fantastic sequence. And even before he falls asleep, there's an amazingly funny part where he's trying to get this customer to identify a dollar bill that's being dropped. So yeah, the stunts are amazing. The part where he sort of jumps through somebody's chest, that's crazy insane. But there's a lot of it which is really funny for me also beyond the stunts, which for me, other than the length, that's probably why it's my favorite of his feature length.
Both the General and Sherlock Jr. is some of my absolute favorite works from the 1920s. I cannot really say much more than just acknowledge its absolute uttermost brilliance. In Sherlock Jr. in particular, one sequence, and I would say cinematic innovation really, and like in the kind of philosophy and potentiality and of cinema, is just this moment when he's projecting a movie for an audience. He falls asleep. His spirit or dream vessel or whatever you want to call it just goes out of his body and moves into the cinema screen. So he walking next to the audience and goes into the cinema screen. And then you have this entire editing machine at work. A stream of consciousness kind of barrage of images, a montage of dream images. So he's standing in one position. The entire, and only he is the permanent element in the shuffling and variations and changing of imagery. He's standing in one way, then he gets transported from a street to a cliff to a garden. For me, this is one of the greatest examples of a kind of dreamlike, surreal sweep of imagery, how editing functions in film, and so forth. I hold it dear for this reason, and of course the poster or the first image of the shot, just him holding this book, How to Be a Detective. I mean, it's Sherlock Jr., it speaks for itself. Like.
And yeah, that scene you're describing there is just absolutely hilarious as well. It goes on for a long time, but it doesn't really overstay its welcome. And no, it just, you don't know where it's going to end up next. One of the other thing about it too is like, what movie would like randomly have this montage? But then again, it's his dream, so he's essentially just being self-deprecating there and putting himself in harm's way. Sherlock Jr., like for being such a short film, like this is also one of the clearest examples of why so many Buster Keaton films are called action films, because the car chases here, etc., are insane. Like one of the greatest stunts here, like it's not the one that broke his neck, it's the one where he is sitting on the steering wheel of a motorcycle, steering it while pretending or believing that the driver is still there, because the driver gets knocked off at the beginning, like close to the beginning of that scene. They're racing together, the driver gets kicked off and he's sitting there thinking he's being driven, the character is. But for Buster Keaton, the actor, he actually has to like stare with his hands behind his back, trying to control the speed and everything. And meanwhile, he's driving in traffic. Well, at one point, people are just throwing dirt at him because he goes by a construction site. He has to be able to perfectly maneuver through the wheels of a huge car. In real life, they actually continued shooting the sequence until he actually crashes with a car as well. So it's just incredible that they got this. And with cameras being as bulky as they are, I mean, I know they probably had to stop a few times during the take and things like that, but like the way they're able to capture all of this is just absolutely spectacular. It's hard to believe. And then you, of course, have the other car chase as well, where he's throwing bombs and lands in a river. There's just so much action-packed madness in this film. You also have that really cool sequence where he seemingly jumps through someone's chest, which was done with a lot of magic of the cinema as well. Like, it's just such an incredibly action-packed experience in just 45 minutes. So much comedy as well. So many of the jokes aren't even stunts. They're just really fun put together gags. It's just absolutely great. And just For those wondering, the stunt where he breaks his neck is the one where he jumps from the train, he grabs a hold of the water pipe, it goes down, and the water just engulfs him. And the reason why he breaks his neck is that they miscalculated the water pressure and just shoots down to him at such a speed that it dislocates his neck. And he didn't even realize until years later. He just went, he had a few drinks, night's sleep, and went back. And like, I think it was 12 years later, they did an x-ray and found out like, hey, like, you broke your neck 12 years ago. This is how it likely happened. And it's just, wow, it's just utterly incredible. Well, that brings us to his most iconic film, The General. And I've spoken for a very, very long time, so I won't really intro this too much. I'll just say that it's set during the Civil War era. Keaton is a trained engineer. He's in love with a girl, but the war breaks out, and his love won't even look at him unless he enlists in the Southern Army. And he tries, but they reject him because they think he's more important as an engineer. Then, a little bit later, his train gets involved in spy action, and he has to get it back. He has to fight with the machine and against the machine and against the forces of the Union Army to save the woman he loves and become a hero with some insane stunts along the way. What are your takes on The General?
Well, The General is an absolute masterpiece, but I have a very kind of deep and personal bond with the film. I've seen it as a kid between the ages of 3 and 11, I would say, about half a dozen of times. It was a regular that would play in my household and that I would just love watching over and over again. That being said, I still call it a dear, dear favorite, but I haven't actually rewatched it in 15 years. I haven't rewatched it since the time that I was 11. So it's probably a completely different discussion whether I can call a film that I haven't watched in, say, 15 years dear favorite. It's probably more a discussion for the What is Taste and the Evolving Taste podcast you can check out. Still, I remember it dearly. I remember all of its gags. They made a big impression on me. And yes, sure, there is this overarching love story component to it, as it's probably the case for 90% of Keaton's work, even though that's just a kind of initial setup, and he never actually explores the kind of romantic and love story element as much as, say, Chaplin does. But that is still a prominent thing. And, well, there's this one moment where he starts choking the girl and then immediately kisses her afterwards. So it just goes to show that there's these all kinds of tensions going on. But I just want to say that of all Keaton films, this one has the strongest narrative grounds because we have the Civil War. And I would say The General is my first ever war movie as well, if I've seen it between the ages of 3 and 11. And for me, just like getting the introduction and to learning about the American Civil War and seeing people in the Yankee or the Confederate uniforms and how they play on that as well, how one of them dresses in the other, and how just this train, this image, this figure of the train just goes through this American territory, and there's so much at stake there. And of course, the most expensive to that date, of course, when the train collapses on the bridge and falls into the river, it was at the time the most expensive stunt ever made. And Buster Keaton operating it, to see him go from the tail end to the other of the train and navigating all of its obstacles, and all of the imagery still stays with me. So I was meaning to watch it yesterday, actually. I was going to break my kind of promise. I'm looking forward to seeing it again with adult eyes, but it's one of these 5 films that have stayed with me since a young age, and that will never let go. So, and I will take it with me to my deathbed,
I absolutely loved hearing about your enthusiasm towards The General, Marcel. It's really great whenever hearing anybody talk enthusiastically about a film. For me, The General's a film that's gone a bit up and down for me. I've seen it 4 times, and I'm sort of a bit on the downside now. I mean, it's still a great film. There's lots of parts of it that work really well. I love how Keaton sort of becomes part of the train engine at times, whether it being caught on the conveyor belt or getting his pants caught on the divide between the 2 carriages. But for me, it's not one of his best feature films. And I guess probably the biggest sticking point for me is for Keaton, for me, is a lot about those facial reactions and those stone face reactions. And because of all the train stunts in there, a lot of the general just by nature is shot in a long shot. So for me, there are some great train sequences, and it's amazing how much is shot with a mobile train, but there aren't that many close-ups on Keaton. So I guess for me, as a character-based story, it sort of comes up a little bit short. We sort of like talked briefly, you touched on Chaplin features versus Keaton features. And the love interest, I think, is a bit better here than Sherlock Jr., even though I prefer Sherlock Jr. The love interest is better in the general because she does get involved and she does help out. She's not completely passive, but it's not really well developed either. You've got to automatically believing that it must be because of cowardice that he's not joining up. And I'm just looking at it last time watching the film going, really? You know, this is the conclusion she's automatically going to jump to. So yeah, I mean, it's a good film. I enjoy it. I always get a laugh out of it. But for me, it doesn't really stand out as one of Keaton's best films overall, especially when you're putting these short films also into consideration. But I love how passionate you are about it, Marcel. I did miss out on the chance to re-watch it in the cinema earlier this year. It was being screened with a modern score, and I really regret that because I love watching comedies with an audience. But if they ever show that again with an audience, even though it's not a top Keaton film for me, I will definitely go out and try and make that screening if I can get to it.
Yeah, but maybe you'll be won over eventually. I mean, one slight disagree. In Sherlock Jr., I mean, it's his love interest that actually solves the case and goes out and investigates while Keaton is off dreaming. So I don't think he was entirely passive. But no, I get part of your criticism of the general. I mean, for me, it is one of his best feature films. And it shows two things for me. I mean, one is just his journey from his short, where he can actually take his time, and that's both a strength and a minus there. I mean, if you look at Our Hospitality, which we might do if we do that versus episode, like that starts up with a really serious prologue, and then it gets comedic. With the general, it also takes its time a little bit, but it has a lot of these non-comedic scenes along the way that kind of stalls. It has a bit of melodrama along the way, which doesn't fully work in its favor. But what makes the general great is everything related to the train. And I will disagree that I think that Keaton's presence and his face is still perfectly visible. He still conveys everything you need, even though some of those shots are slightly further away. All of those antics around the train, the fact that it's just this one largely consistent story of him fighting against, like, first of all, you have the train ahead of him, and then you have him fighting against his own limitations and silliness. And it just has so many great shots. I mean, it probably has some of the best laughs. Our Hospitality is my favorite Keaton, but the general probably has the biggest laughs, at least of his features. Like, there's that one shot where he rallies all of the Confederate army. He tells them all that the train has been stolen. He gets them all onto the wagons. He's in front of the train. He starts the train. They're all going to go fight. And he drives away. And as he starts moving, you see that the other cars aren't following him. And they're all just left there standing like, what the hell is going on? And Keaton is completely unaware, keeps driving. Like that's one of the biggest laughs I've had from a Keaton film. That there's just also so much action throughout, like just written action breaking apart the wagons with people shooting, jumping from like shooting live cannonballs. Apparently that was a real cannon he used. Like the amount of just crazy explosions, the scale as well. It's just an insane spectacle that keeps you on your toes and just has constant suspense. So definitely one of his best. So I do think that the more melodramatic and more quiet elements, they are not that great. And I think that's one of the limitations of Keaton as a director as well. I think Keaton is a great comedic director. He manages to use the space well, but I don't think he has the scope to be a great dramatic director. Like, he didn't have that practice. So those scenes just, like, they're just there. And that is a slight negative for me.
Yeah, but you always needed this kind of narrative framework for audiences to become interested in something. Of course, for Keaton, it was primarily all about the stunts and the physical and the spectacle, as you described it. But I suppose for audiences, you just needed this framework. Like, think about Bill Jr. You could also arguably say, like, yes, you have this kind of Romeo and Juliet setup. It's two fathers fighting against each other and all that, but it's all about the 20-minute sequence at the end of the film where he's just surviving a cyclone and has to save everybody. You could argue in this kind of ways, and that goes back to Saul's point about his short films being superior to his features in some respects, because there he can, like, in the space of 20 minutes, mostly focus on his pure unapologetic dance enmeshed in these machinic processes, fighting against the forces of nature, trying to survive here and there, or running away from gangsters or other suitors and so forth. But I would still say that in the general, this narrative framework is quite prominent. At least this American Civil War setting is, is the only instance of one of his films which you could say is inspired by true life. Whereas, 1 week I wouldn't imagine someone building a house that absurd. The construction boxes were shuffled around, or the cameraman is an interesting Keaton feature that we haven't mentioned yet. That one also is one of his last ones, where he's like a photo reporter, and he's always carrying a camera on his back and a monkey. Well, we can get to his sound area at another point, but I just want to shout out the Samuel Beckett's film from 1956 that was made shortly prior to his death. It's a short film which is also all nearly completely silent. It's unlike anything he's ever starred in. But yeah.
I think you brought up a really interesting point there with the general, that it's one you can kind of feel taking place in the real world. And I think that that's one of those big things that changed in this very, very short span of 10 years, or from Keaton started directing himself in 1920 until the general, which is just like 7 years, that he essentially went from a world where a lot of people are pretty wacky and crazy, and there's so much silliness going around, to worlds where he is like the main comedic deviant, if you will. Like, often it's accidental, he's just accident prone, but essentially as his filmography progressed, he is the main element that's just slightly off in that story. The way he acts, the way he engages, there's been more and more of a contrast between him and a more serious story. Even in like Steamboat Bill, like, yes, there's a little bit comedic elsewhere too, but like all of those other characters are mainly playing it straight. He's the one that's like this quirky new addition to that world, and so much of the hijinks happen either because of him in the early on, but then obviously you have the cyclone as well. But I think that's a really, really interesting thing, that Keaton essentially learned that he doesn't have to be all out bombastic. He can pace himself and he can wait for a joke. And I think that the general in particular is just such a great example of that, because it's not filled with gags. Like, there's several scenes in the general that doesn't have a joke in it. That might be slightly to his detriment in part, but he felt like he didn't need a joke. Like, he could have a 2-minute segue, and that was the build up to a punchline. Sometimes it would be more active, but a lot of it just would be action, for instance. So it wouldn't just be humor. And I think that's one thing that Keaton really started to excel in. And I know Saul might disagree a little bit there, but just Keaton felt more and more comfortable letting the jokes build. He didn't feel like he needed a joke on a joke. He didn't feel like he needed to be overly silly. He just let things pace out. Like, he could stage an entire sequence, calling the soldiers, getting the soldiers on the train, building it up, and then he drives away. He didn't need 10 little jokes about people falling while they were getting on those trams, for instance. So I think that's a sign of him maturing, for better or worse. Maybe it's always say for the worse. But I really appreciate this, seeing that journey over just such a short time frame. And it would have been interesting to see just how it would have developed if he had been allowed to stay in control rather than be pushed into the studio system where they made most decisions for him, unfortunately.
Well, we would have to live in an altered reality to see what would have happened to Keaton after 1929 if he didn't make a bad production deal. And of course, his wife left him. And there's a whole lot of personal why his transition to the sound era wasn't successful. And his legacy has survived. There's so much that we can learn from and appreciate from his films to this day. And you can just see the echoes of his work and his stunts in so many other films.
I don't think I have a lot more to add, other than I do like how you've described Keaton's evolution, Chris. I thought that was quite nice and poetic way you described it. I guess to me it is sort of disappointed in the way that he evolved because, like I said, the highest sign 1 week I put it up as his highest or his best films, and those were made in 1920, 1921. But the influence of Keaton is absolutely undeniable. And yeah, beyond the films that we've talked about in depth, you've got ones like Steamboat Bill Jr., which became the inspiration for Steamboat Willie, the stunts that Chaplin has done that have been done in Jackie Chan comedies, to even Diane Keaton and Michael Keaton, both taking their names after Buster Keaton. His influence on cinema is absolutely undeniable. And even though I don't love the Journal as much as most people do, I do understand why it's a respected classic. And for me, Keaton is definitely one of the great filmmakers. He's just, to me personally, somebody who succeeded better in short film form. But I still love him. Whenever we have a silent challenge on the ICM forum, I'm always making sure that I'm watching or rewatching a couple of Keaton features or short films, because to me he's really one of those luminaries of the silent era, and it's fantastic that we're able to do a whole podcast on him tonight.
Yeah, this was great fun, and hopefully we'll be able to return to Keaton in some way. I mean, we've floated a few ideas here already, like, are we going to do that Keaton versus Chaplin versus Lloyd and possibly versus Linder episode? I'd even be up for Keaton in the sound era, because that would also be really, really interesting to do and to see where it went wrong.
Yeah, cheers. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. Thanks for listening as well.
And do take the journey over to icmforum.com to let us know what you think about Buster Keaton. If you agree with Saul that he's better in his shorts than in his features, if Keaton's shorts are better than Chaplin's shorts, and what do you think about our analysis of why Keaton was great. Feel free to disagree with us or agree with us on anything at all. Oh, and let us know what kind of sequel you would want for this episode as well, because your word might be our command. So until next time, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.